Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Callie, and I know June is quite literally almost over. It's over, I think, later this week. The days aren't real and they don't really exist to me right now. But I'm gonna do my May wrap up. So I'm sorry for being a little bit behind, but I've been very busy the past couple of weeks. All fun things, but very busy nonetheless. So for May, I'm gonna jump right into the stats. I read a total of 29 books. I DNF'd 4, and I had 2 rereads for this month. For number of print, I had 23, and then I had 6 ebooks, no audiobooks. And then for genre breakdowns, I had 17 fantasy, 10 romance, 1 thriller, and 1 sci-fi. So, without further ado, with all of that, let's get into all the books that I read. Started off really strong since May 1st was, I think, either the day or the day after we got back from a Polycon. I naturally read an Polycon book that I bought there, which was the Highland Fling by Meghan Quinn. This was so cute. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. The banter was hilarious. I loved the ambience on being in the Scottish Highlands. And it was just so cute and wholesome. And I'm obsessed with Meghan Quinn now. I mean, before this, I was obsessed with Meghan Quinn, but I will literally read anything this woman writes. Up next, I had one of my rereads for the month, and that is Where Dreams Descend by Janella Angelis. This was set as a Moulin Rouge meets Phantom of the Opera and add magic to it. I read this in anticipation of reading the sequel. I tried reading the sequel and I DNF'd it. I ended up giving the first book 3 stars, which is actually lower than what I gave it originally. I just was very bored. There was supposed to be this big magic. It tried to be the Night Circus, and the Night Circus, while was slow, still had a bunch of action within it, whereas this didn't. And our phantom element wasn't really present until the very end, which was kind of agitating. So unfortunately, I ended up unhauling both of these books. Next, I have We Three Heroes by Lynette and Noni. This is the companion book, which you're supposed to read after Greyville, but before Vardasia. This is, I think, technically book 5 then in the Medoran Chronicles, which is a series I've been reading all year. This is 3 short stories following the other heroes of the Medoran Chronicles, Alex's best friends, Bear, DC, and Jordan. And I loved getting these. They were very different perspectives and throughout different times throughout the books, which I really appreciated. Because there were definitely times throughout the stories where I wanted to see other point of views, and this did that, and it was a perfect build-up to what Vardasia ended up being. I have already read Vardasia, but Vardasia, I can't pronounce it right. The final book, I've read it. It's fantastic. This whole series is great. I'll talk about that later. But this is a great novella. It didn't take away from the main plot. If anything, it added to it. And there was just so many aspects that were really cool to see within this story. Next, I read Wrecked by Lauren Asher. This is the 3rd book in the Dirty Air series. This one was so good. This followed so many topics I wasn't ready for. Hereditary diseases, featuring Huntington's. We also follow like deep-rooted childhood traumas. The love story within this is so beautiful and so just immaculate. I loved every second of this love story. Elena and Jax, they were both very on fire and hot, while at the same time trying to understand each other and the struggles that they were each facing. I don't know if I said this. I gave this 4.5 stars. Definitely my second favorite in the entire series. Next, I read Restless Slumber by KJ Sutton. This is the 2nd book in the Fortuna Sworn series. It's very weird doing this very late in the month because I've already read the 3rd book to this already. But this book broke me. The very end, this is following a really cool world with Fae kingdoms, the unseelie, seelie courts. We have all manner of different magical creatures. It's phenomenal. The romance is great. The storytelling is great. But realistically, where this shines is in its character arcs. And Fortuna goes through it in this book and in the subsequent book, which I will try to get to much sooner than, I'll try to get to that review much sooner than I did for this month. But I digress. I love this series, fully invested. This book made me fully invested. I was a little hesitant with book 1. It was fine. This amped it up, and I am now I'm here for Fortuna's story. I gave this 4.5 stars. Up next, I read Gallant by V.E. Schwab. This was, I think, technically like middle grade young adult book with like a portal fantasy mixed with haunted house. It was sold as like a lot of different things, but it didn't do a lot of those things well. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. I was bored. I don't know what it was about this book in particular. I just didn't care for it as much as I have her other stories. I wasn't connected to the characters. The plot was kind of self-explanatory, if that makes sense. Very predictable, and just it didn't hook me like her other stories do, unfortunately. Up next, I have Fetch, which is the second book in the Fazbear Frights series by Scott Cawthon, Andrea, Waggener, and Kerrlyn West. This one's my favorite in the series so far. Yes, I've read the third one already. It was really good. I actually listened to that one on audio. Again, I'll get to that later. Fetch has been my favorite. It has my favorite story in it. These are just so crazy and insane and can literally only exist in the FNAF universe. I adore the FNAF universe. Today's a great day for FNAF fans. I'm filming this on Tuesday when the full movie trailer for Five Nights at Freddy's dropped. So excited to go see that in theaters. Sarah and I have already planned a double date for that night, and I'm just so invested in this entire world. I ended up giving this 3 stars. It was fine. It was a wild ride, and it was just fun. Next, I have This Woven Kingdom by Tahereh Mafi. I gave this book 5 stars. I love this book. This book was so good. It wove so many different elements of Tahereh Mafi's writing style that I love. Great characters. The setting was so fascinating. We're following 2 characters within this book. We're following Eliza, who is essentially this like djinn in hiding. And then we're following Cameron, who is the crown prince. And then he spots her and starts to wonder why she's there. He notices her, like, I think they beat up people, and starts to just get really obsessed with her. And I love that in a male main character, but the story is what sold me. There's so much history and lore within this book. It was so fascinating. I could not put it down. I love Tahereh Mafi's writing style, so this is fantastic. Again, filming this late in the month is a little weird. I've already read the sequel. Loved the sequel, which happens right after the events of this one. So I'm loving this series. It's fantastic. It is very different from Shatter Me, but in the best possible ways. Up next, I have Redeemed by Lauren Asher. This is the 4th and final book in the Dirty Air series, and my personal favorite. We're following Sal, who is the brother from book 1. And he gets into this really bad accident 3 years prior to the story where he loses his leg. And he is in full caveman mode when this girl from the States who is trying to find her long-lost father ends up accidentally breaking into his house. And it's this wild ride, but the story is so amazing. There's PTSD. This one shows toxic relationships, as well as found family. And the epilogue that include all of the Dirty Air couples was everything I could have ever asked for. So loved that just so much. I gave this one 5 stars. I loved this book so much. So next, I read a book called Morning Glory Milking Farm by C.M. Nacosta. This is a Minotaur human romance. I met this author at a Polycon and got curious, and I satiated my curiosity. I gave this 3 stars, and now we're moving on. The next book I read was How to Love Your Elf by Kerrlyn Sparks. I did not like this book. It was insta-love disguised as enemies to lovers. I didn't like it. The plot was super weird and jumped all over the place, and I was bored throughout most of it, and I didn't care. That was a big issue, is she was very, I'll never love an elf, and then, oh, sure shit, she falls in love with the first elf she meets. It was a whole thing, and obviously I got rid of it. I read this physical copy of it, and I didn't care for it, unfortunately. Up next, I read Fairy Tale by Stephen King. This was a recommendation by my dad. He really liked it. I didn't really care for it. It was good up until a certain point. within the story. I really liked it. I was here for the relationship with the kid, the old man, and the dog. I loved that build-up, but I feel like our build-up never really went anywhere. Plus, the writing style and verbiage, the humor was really not my kind of humor. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was a decent story, but I think I'm going to give up on trying to go for Stephen King books. Next, I have Honor Among Thieves by Rachel Caine and Anne Aguirre. This is a sci-fi story where essentially these sentient ships take on honors, humans, to travel with them for a year as like this whole weird space whale program. I imagine them as the space whale from Doctor Who, in case anybody's watched that. That's how I imagine. The first book was really interesting. It was very predictable, and the pacing was a bit all over the place, but I found the concept to be really interesting. And I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. Next, I have my second reread. I reread A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, which is really weird to finally get to ACOTAR with my reread. I've been 100% in Throne of Glassland, so jumping from Heir of Fire right into Court of Thorns and Roses was really interesting. There are definitely things that I have picked up on, which I have not in previous rereads. Plus, usually when I reread ACOTAR, I skip book 1. For obvious reasons, if you've read this series. But I love this series. The romance is top tier. Obviously not in this book, in the second book, which I will be getting to, I think, next month. I'm currently on Queen of Shadows. But I gave this 5 stars. I always give it 5 stars. As much as I, like, see all of the red flags and the bad things about this book, I still love the story and can fall for the love interest again. I can be fooled a little bit in the beginning with this book. Up next, I have Silver in the Bone by Alexandra Bracken. This is my fairy edition. I really liked this. I was a little nervous to read this because I didn't care for lore, which was her previous book. But I ended up giving this 4 stars. This is an Arthurian legend retelling in the modern world. There was a lot of really cool, like, archaeological hunting, along with really cool maps and different puzzles that all the main characters had to solve. I really enjoyed how everything came together with this, and I'm really intrigued as to where this series is going to go. Up next, I have Bow Before the Elf Queen by J.M. Kearl. I gave this 4 stars. I really liked this. It has everything I want. It's got fated mates, enemies to lovers, forced proximity, a wild war going on, plus a very broody, grumpy prince. Or no, he's a king. He's definitely a king. Weird zombie elves. All fun things that I really liked. The setup to this story was really fascinating. We have our main character who is an elf but is hiding among humans. So she has this weird humanity about her, and the king ends up finding her because he's their mates. You learn that right at the beginning. And he just takes her because they will die if they don't assume the role of mates. And it's really fascinating to see that kind of aspect of it. Plus, there are so many other things. I've read the sequel already. I'm patiently waiting for book 3 to drop. But I really like this. It's badass females. It is almost like a reverse Grumpy Sunshine. But, like, they're both... No, not even a reverse Grumpy Sunshine. Like, they're both grumpy. And it's kind of hysterical to have them, like, match each other's energy. Next, I have Storm and Fury by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I'm trying to read other JLA books besides her From Blood and Ash World. And I started with this one, and I think this was a really cool one. This is demons versus angels. And then we have these gargoyles who are known as wardens who protect the angels from the demons, and we end up with this weird gray area. Our main character is also going blind, and she's half angel, and it's fascinating to see those two things collide, the human side of her physiologically compared to her magically being an angel. And I loved that dichotomy. The plot twists were all over the place in a very good way. And I very much enjoy this. If anything, it was just a tad bit too long for me. Sometimes a lot of things lulled, some things were a bit obvious, but I thoroughly enjoyed this. I think I really like JLA's writing style. She gets you right into the story immediately with the characters and the plot line. Up next, I have Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. This is an oldie, and I finally have gotten to it. This is another Angels and Demons one, which is really interesting. The tagline to this is like an angel and a demon fell in love and all hell broke loose, and that is exactly what this is. I will say, the writing's really weird. I haven't read a Laini Taylor book in so long. The last I read her other series, the Strange the Dreamer duet. Really loved it. And this is very similar in that whimsical writing style. I really liked this. I have since read the sequel. I liked that less. But I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. It does read very YA. And as I am nearing my 30s, YA, especially older YA, this I think came out when I was in high school. I think this came out like 2011, 2010, something to that, 2011. So I was in high school. I would have loved this in high school, and I did really like it. I just don't think I loved it as much as I would have when I was 16. Up next, I have Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. This is the first Colleen Hoover I have disliked. I typically like Colleen Hoover as an author. I haven't outwardly hated anything that she has brought up. She's written a couple of my favorite books, but this one just didn't hit it. There was no one to root for. This follows a young woman as she's getting out of prison and wants to reconnect with the daughter she had right when she got into prison. It's like 4 or 5 years after the fact. You slowly learn why she went to prison throughout the books, and then it feels like a big miscommunication trope, as well as shitty detective work, so that she just got punished for. But there was no winning, no matter who you rooted for, which was kind of a bummer. And it didn't hit the way, I didn't connect with the characters as much as I have with her other book. Reminders of Him, I ended up giving 3 stars. Next I have Long Live the Elf Queen by J.M. Kearl. It's the sequel to Bow Before the Elf Queen. One of the best sequels I've ever read. I gave this 4 stars. Fantastic. I loved how our characters grew given the consequences after the events of the first book. And it was just that plot twist at the very end I did not see coming, so that was a whole thing that I still think about to this day, and there is no hide, no hair of a release date for the next book, which I desperately need, because I need answers to how that book fucking ended. But I really liked this, and this was, I need physical copies of this so that I can do all my tabs, because I had theories, and I have so many thoughts, especially after that bomb that dropped. Up next, I have To Bleed a Crystal Bloom by Sarah A. Parker. This was another one of my Polycom books that I really wanted to get to. I met her at a panel, and it was kind of discussed as like a very dark Rapunzel retelling. And it is a very dark Rapunzel retelling. It is also a character study on trauma responses. You have Orlaith and Rorden, who are just so screwed up that they go ham into their screwed upness. You hate the decisions they make. It's so bad in the decision making, but it is so fascinating to read them dealing with those consequences as well as making subsequent worse choices. I end up giving this 3 stars. I am fascinated as to where this story is going. There doesn't feel like a plot line, if I'm honest. This feels like just character arc, which I'm not mad about. It's just really weird to like kind of follow a plot line, but I couldn't tell you what the actual plot to this book was besides watch Orlaith fuck up and Rorden clean up her messes and then fuck it up worse. So that's our plot. So I am very easily influenced by the internet, especially when it comes to books. So right when I was finishing To Bleed a Crystal Bloom, a certain book took all of Book Talk by storm. And I think To Bleed a Crystal Bloom was the last official book on my TBR. Thankfully. However, I would have dropped everything to read this book. And that is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I picked this up immediately. I even got the cool fancy edition. Found it at my Target. Very happy. I give this 5 stars. I love this book so much. I think about this book every single fucking day. It is my new personality trait. It is dragons, war college, betrayal, enemies to lovers. It is adult. There is adult content in here. It feels very dystopian. A lot of people say it feels like Divergent, and I would 100% agree with that, except for good, because Divergent wasn't great in my opinion, but it is everything I love in a fantasy romance book. So I give it 5 stars. Up next, I have another Polycom book. I tried to read a ton of them after I went. I'm still trying to read a ton of them after I went. That is Not Your Ex's Hexes by April Asher. This is a companion book to Her Not the Witch You Wed, which I will say I preferred book 1. I am still going to read book 3 when that comes out because I'm intrigued to that plotline. But it's like a forbidden love story. We have a demon and a witch. This felt too fast. Everything happened really, really quickly, and it felt insta-lovey, and then everything was kind of shucked to the wayside. I didn't hate it, but I didn't connect with it as much as I did with book 1. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. Next, I have A Shadow Crown by Melissa Blair. This just dropped last month, so I read it right when it showed up at my house. Because again, I'm very easily influenced, especially once I'm officially done with my TBR. I go wild. Like, I think, yeah. To Bleed a Crystal Bloom was the last book on my official TBR. The rest of these were, yeah. Yep. This was the sequel to A Broken Blade, which I really liked. And I was a little nervous to read the second book, because I think this is going to be a whole series, and books 2 or 3, depending on how long the series, usually get, I don't want to say dumbed down, but they just get boring. This did not get boring. If anything, this amped up the tension and the plot even more. And I'm giving this 4 stars. I adore Kira, and I love how everything came together in this book. And I'm so excited to see the direction. It has shifted directions so many times, but it is shifted again towards the end, and I'm so intrigued as to where it's going to go. Another Polycom book. I read The Plus One by Maisie Eddings, and this is my favorite in the entire series. This had anxiety rep up the wazoo, as well as like childhood nemesis. This has PTSD. It had so many aspects that were so beautifully written. It made me sob. It was a beautiful love story. One of my favorite quotes ever is from this book, and that is, "I am not here to fix you. I'm here to love you." And I think about